It's a real honor to be here today talking to you about my research, and it's a real privilege to have been awarded a prize this summer. I'm just finishing my PhD in geography here at the University of Cambridge, and I received the award for applied research carried out as part of my doctoral project, which resulted in the co-production of a children's book. And this book served as a research method, a dissemination strategy, and also a means to engage with the power dynamics that I have been researching. So I think before talking more about the book, it's kind of quite important to talk about the case study first, and then we'll come back to the book in a second. So the doctoral project is a highly situated ethnographic study on the border between Chile and Argentina. And we're focusing on, I can't quite get there. It's sort of wandering off. But we can see there's two volcanoes on this map, hopefully. There is a national border between Chile and Argentina running down the right-hand side, and Volcan Copahue, or Copahue volcano, is bisected by the national border. So that means it's a very unique and kind of complicated study for transboundary risk management that is further complicated by the fact that we have semi-nomadic indigenous communities living on both sides of the national border. This area is characterized by intense seasonal extremes. We have snowfall, we have, in the summer, drought, landslides, which are only being exacerbated further by climate change. And standard governance mechanisms, which are based on static populations and relatively constant conditions, really don't map well onto this case study. And so the mitigation of volcanic risk remains a particularly contentious issue here. Volcanism is only risky if it presents a danger to lives, livelihoods, or life worlds. That's the kind of definition. And while socio-political factors play a huge role in community vulnerability to natural hazards, this is accepted in theory, in practice, the risk paradigm has struggled to engage with these factors. In general, disaster risk reduction struggles to engage with issues of agency. So either assuming state responsibility trumps, to kind of keep people safe, trumps individual freedoms, or most often that the disconnect between official agendas and community behavior is due to a lack of understanding. So this is the kind of the knowledge deficit model which underpins a lot of this work, which is essentially me saying, if you knew what I know, you would agree with me and do what I want you to do, which can be particularly problematic when it's being uncritically applied to indigenous peoples, as they have their own kind of knowledge systems of their own territories, and often they have a difficult relationship with state actors because of colonization. So I spent 9 months on fieldwork to try and understand the conflicts between these different ways of knowing and being in the territory, and this included a detailed field diary, 38 interviews. 18 of these took place on horseback, covering a distance of 114 kilometers. So I went with the communities on their seasonal migration patterns. I spent most of my time in Chile living with a Pehuenche family in Butalibun, which is the closest community to the national border. We can kind of see some pictures here. With one family group actually occupy the eastern flanks of the volcano in summer itself. This is one of the most remote and marginalized communities in Chile. And it was an honor to have been granted permission to kind of work with this community. They have not allowed an academic study for over 20 years, so it's a real honor. I also spent time on the Argentinian side of the volcano, which is a very different reality. This is Copahue, which is a new ski village that they've built on the side of the volcano in Argentina. And it's populated by a mix of Mapuche indigenous people and sort of settlers, usually from kind of Buenos Aires. And this has only been, it was founded in 1986. And what's really interesting is that most of the Mapuche people who live on this side of the volcano think that the westernized development is the reason that the volcano started erupting again. So it was erupting last in the 1960s. And since 1991, it started to erupt pretty much every winter, which corresponds with the first houses that were built and then the opening of the ski center. We had really serious eruptions after both of those kind of events. So there's a real kind of disconnect between why disasters are kind of potentially occurring here. From there, I also visited the Mapuche community, who is still transhuman, and their kind of summer grasslands, which is very close by this ski village. So essentially, this area is marked by mutual distrust and a lack of communication both within and between groups. And this is in part a legacy of colonization and persistent coloniality, and in part due to a forced evacuation that happened in 2013 on the Chilean side of the volcano. So we can see here, this community, most of the adults had never left their land, and the Chilean government turned up with military trucks and told everyone they had to get in to avoid this eruption. Unfortunately, the predicted eruption the predicted magnitude didn't occur, and there was a lot of conflict over the evacuation of animals. Lots of animals died. It was a real mess, basically. And this event is essentially why this project was suggested by the Chilean Geological Institute as a case study. They know that they cannot connect with these people. They know that what they are doing isn't working, but they don't know how to move forward. In contrast, on the Argentinian side of the volcano, they didn't have an observatory, a volcano observatory in 2013, and that was actually formed in response to this eruption because they were like, oh, we really need to have something happening here. But they haven't really managed to connect with local communities. So often people say, oh, but we don't have scientists, or the Chilean scientists know more. So they don't really have a relationship with people. And so essentially the problem here is that scientists and emergency workers are good people doing really good work. The science is amazing, but you can do the best science in the world, but if no one does what you kind of need them to do, then actually it doesn't really make sense at all. So they don't know how to move forward, which is where this project comes in. Trust is a choice and can't be forced. So the question becomes, how can we create space for more symmetrical conversations between knowledges, nations, and socio-natural worlds? So to date, the literature still emphasizes the difference between the scientific expert and the kind of local, traditional, or indigenous person or knowledge system. And while this is important, it doesn't necessarily suggest pathways to move the conversation forward beyond binary thinking. We have here videos taken during my fieldwork and kind of contrasted with the risk map, essentially. These are the two ways of maybe understanding the territory. And I argue in my thesis that a lot of the conflicts arise from these tensions between this abstracted and embodied ways of kind of knowing and understanding what's happening. And this reflects a wider disconnect between disaster risk reduction, theory, and practice in general. And so when we're looking at how the links between knowledge and power, and essentially this is a power dynamic, the power dynamics become evident when we look at how ideas or imaginaries are enacted in practice. A common thread that I've identified through this work is that essentially if we look at kind of the both risk and Mapuche Pehuenche transhumance are different spatio-temporal patterns of movement. Community movement patterns are determined by seasonal variations and ecological microclimates, while risk management is trying to adapt these movement patterns to avoid potential disaster. It's very simple. And so far so obvious, but this subtle reframing allows us to engage with how these priorities come together, why they come into conflict, and actually bring them into conversation. Spatio-temporal patterns of movement is actually a very academic and complicated way of talking about rhythms. I don't have time to talk too much about rhythms with you today, but it is a really key part of my thesis and a key empirical reframing in my work. So if anyone wants to ask me questions about it, I would love to answer them. But it has also become the title of the book. So the book, this is the book that we awarded the prize. It's called We Dance with the Rhythms of Ñuke Mapu, which is their word for Mother Earth. And so essentially, as soon as we start talking in terms of rhythm, and as soon as we start talking in terms of the dance of life, for example, we start having a conversation where both scientists and community members can have a conversation on equal terms. The scientists are having to use a metaphor and sort of let go of their pyroclastic flows and probabilities, but suddenly the community can actually engage and kind of have a more symmetrical conversation about how do we adapt to the changing rhythms of the volcano. It becomes a collaborative problem. Access and engagement with the community as part of this project. Obviously, as I've said, it was a real honor. This was agreed with the head of the community on the basis of providing a community resource in reciprocity for the work. And his brief was essentially that to forget about the adults, unfortunately, the differences are too entrained, and instead to work with the children. So this book was illustrated by the children using drawings. We did art workshops, and then I've kind of photoshopped them together, and I co-authored the story with their community knowledge holder. And it's a fictional story. Oops, maybe. It's a fictional story that takes place over the course of a year, and it weaves together tacit knowledge, ancestral knowledge, and scientific knowledge in a way that it aims to be empowering. So this is their land, this is their volcano, and this is in their languages, but it's also useful. So this is an exercise in imagining new futures, and I was hoping that this image would change so that we would go through the pages, but maybe not. I'm so sorry. That's a shame. Oh, there we go, thank you. So there's a lot of relatively basic knowledge that the community don't have because of their relationship with the state actors, and also the high levels of adult illiteracy. So this kind of stop, drop, and roll information could save lives. So the book is an attempt to reimagine new possibilities of what might happen if the volcano erupts, to give value to their tacit knowledge in the present tense of how they live with their territory, and also to be able to talk about these topics without using the word evacuation, which is a no-go word, and by decentering the role of state agencies as well. So we can see in the story there's a landslide, and it's all resolved, but it's done through consulting with elders and community authority figures, which respects their authority structure, but also the municipality kind of protocols as well. So there's a sort of like sideways learning that happens through, and hopefully you can see that it's quite fun as well. It's always talking about reading the landscape in a way that is very natural to them. There's no cross-sectional diagrams of the volcano in this story. And the idea, thanks to CSAR now, is to develop this book in collaboration with the Chilean Geological Institute, to put QR codes on the pages, to rewrite the story slightly so that it makes sense to someone who's not from the community, so explaining maybe that they are semi-nomadic and all these kind of things, in a way that the book can become not just a sort of cultural heritage artifact, but a learning resource for people outside of the community as well. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I don't know if you have any questions.
So are there some questions for Carolyn? Wait for the mic. While you're deciding, I'd like to ask, what's the nature of the transhumance? How far do they go up, and do they take sheep, goats up high?
Yeah, they'll go right up onto the volcano. They used to cover much larger distances, but obviously with colonization, they've kind of been squished up against the border. But it's about, at the moment, depends on the community, but it's really as high as the Andes get.
Why? Because of colonization are they squished up? Just because other lands have been taken for farming?
And because of the border. So usually they wouldn't be here in winter, and you can't really see from this lovely sunny photo, but it's in winter when the volcano poses a lot more of a hazard because of the risk of lahars. I don't know if that means anything to anyone here. In the summer, usually they would have gone into the Argentinian pampas, so they're covering much larger distances.
So there's a tension just because of national boundaries, basically, as well. Okay, there's a question up at the back there.
Thank you very much. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and I can think a number of similar applications for that approach. But my question relates to the point you made about the ski village and that new development is associated with volcanic eruptions. Is there no traditional history amongst the community about the frequency of eruptions in the past?
So the ski village, so as I was sort of just saying, the volcano presents much more of a risk in the winter. And so the idea that they've built this ski center right on the side of the volcano, so that we literally have people skiing on the volcano in winter, and it has tended to erupt in winter, There's a lot of kind of connections here. I don't know necessarily how many people really believe that it's a direct connection. They have between the two, but there's definitely a sense of like, it's a disrespectful way to live in this area. And so often they will frame things in terms of disrespect, which is actually traditional knowledge, meaning like this is not a safe thing to do. So it is very logical. If a volcano tends to erupt in winter, don't go build something on the side of it that people wouldn't have it in winter. So yeah, I think there's like a lot of wisdom in actual just common sense sometimes.
A question here from...
Well, actually, two questions. One, are the groups on the Chilean and the Argentinian side originally the same indigenous group that before the border got put in? Are they the same group of people, but maybe the traditions are slightly are they the same indigenous group on both sides of the border? And the other thing is, do some of the adults have a suspicion that you're trying to indoctrinate the children through the book?
So they, Mapuche is a general name for the peoples who are living in this area. It means people of the land, quite simply. Pehuenche is a specific name for the people who live on the Chilean side. It means people of the Pehuen. So they live with the monkey puzzle trees and they eat the pine nuts. And during the genocides, they survived in the monkey puzzle tree forest on these pine nuts. So they're very proud that they are Pehuenche, they are not Mapuche, and so there's a lot of kind of intergroup politics. Most people have family who live on the other side of the border. There is kind of informal movement, but because of the construction of the border, there's actually quite interesting competition and a lot of animal stealing happening across the border because they have their grasslands there. They don't have any fences, the animals just live free. And the Argentinians have a lot larger herd. So there's quite a lot of like weird dynamics that the border's set up. I wouldn't say that anyone is suspicious of the agenda of the book. It's really hard to get art materials here. And so just running an art workshop with these kids, they were amazing. And showing them the final book was huge. And it meant so much to them. And even, I don't know if you saw, there was a picture where the women are weaving in the house. That's taken from a photo of the family that I stayed with, the grandma, who taught me how to weave one afternoon. And she can't read, but she could see that that was her work. And so just seeing themselves represented is so important. And there is an ancestral history included in the story. At one point they sit down in the grasslands and the grandma tells a story of their ancestors. That is their ancestral knowledge, and that is in both Spanish and Chedungun. That's the first time it's been written, and they are so proud. I think it kind of says it here, like, to have it written in Chedungun is so important to them as a people because they are losing their language now with these pressures to kind of like become more Occidental. And so, yeah, I don't think they were so worried about the agenda.
Okay, a final question online from Jan Dvorak. How has or will the book be made available to the community members?
So currently it only exists in the community really. I have a couple of copies, but I forgot to bring one tonight, I'm so sorry. But we printed 100 copies, 150 copies. And so every family in the community has a copy. There's one in the municipal library, there's a couple in the school. So this is a community resource for them, but those books aren't to be sold or kind of. And so when we develop the book, it will be changed slightly and it will be for sale. But currently it only exists within the community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.